Have you ever wondered why we have curve cuts on every crosswalk of the street? What do you think curve cuts are for? Not everyone knows what curve cuts are for, and for some, they might be insignificant. For a certain group of people, it is a big necessity in order for them to cross the street safely. However, we didn't always have curve cuts on our sidewalks. It wasn't until the Rehabilitation Act, Section 504, that made public and private facilities required to provide access for people with disabilities, according to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
I think too often disability access is seen as something that's just about disability, and it's not. We make these changes in the built environment, and we make them, from a starting place of people with disabilities, and it ends up benefiting everyone. There's a lot of gains that we build in and we make because of disability, but it ends up benefiting everyone. The curb cut is the most clear-cut example of that. That's something that was put in for wheelchair riders, but now parents with strollers use them, delivery people use them, skateboards and bicycles, and people with travelers with luggage on wheels use them. So you build it in and it ends up benefiting anyone. And the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 included a very radical and important clause called Section 504. And it said that any federally funded program or facilities could not discriminate on the basis of disability. Before the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and before 504, it meant that you could have a court date, and if the court was inaccessible, how did you get in the door? It was perfectly legal for the court to be completely inaccessible to you. Before 504, a school could just say, no, we don't want to take you because you have a disability. Or a government job could refuse to hire a person with a disability, saying, we think that'll be too much of a burden. We really don't like to hire people with disabilities. A library didn't have to be accessible. A recreation center for the public didn't have to be accessible. And city projects didn't have to be accessible. So sidewalks, didn't have curb cuts yet. And that was perfectly legal. So 504 changed all of that. 504 was the first civil rights legislation for people with disabilities.
Hello, my name is Dennis Phillips. I was born and raised in San Francisco, California. I can't remember the date. I think it was April 7th of 1977 when we decided that we were going to make a difference in society to show the world and society that disabled persons could and can help themselves to a greater benefit of the American pie.
The access features that we won through the 504 protests and through the 504 legislation are incredibly important for helping people with disabilities be able to be participants in society and to be active and to contribute and be involved. It's a frustrating part of the story is that people early on resisted making changes to the built environment because they said, well, we don't see disabled people out on the streets. And the reason why disabled people weren't out on the streets as much was because it wasn't accessible, and they needed these changes in order to be more active citizens, to be workers. These rights were achieved by people with disabilities in an empowered position demanding these rights rather than something that was handed down from the government. It came because people, grassroots action, fought and won these achievements.
The Rehabilitation Act, as far as I know, was an act that were going to permit disabled persons certain abilities to have access to schools and other educational facilities, as well as sidewalks, buses, elevators, to move society into the direction where people with wheelchairs, canes, crutches, quadriplegics, hearing impaired could exist.
504 still has an impact today on working to make this world more accessible and helping make sure that federally funded programs and facilities do not and cannot discriminate on the basis of disability. There's more to be done, for sure, and it's still an ongoing process, and we still need disability advocates keeping the government in check and reminding when discrimination does happen and when the law gets forgotten. But we have come a long, long way in terms of much more accessible spaces.